The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you were in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Wow. That was the final fatal moment for Kamala Harris's campaign bid or bid to be president in 2020, when Tulsi Gabbard then just peppered her with all these really hard questions and statements, and she never recovered from that. I think that was the final death nail of her campaign, which we certainly saw as she dropped out shortly thereafter. And one has to wonder if Kamala Harris couldn't handle those kinds of questions, what would she do if she was president? Well, that may be more than just a theoretical question. And we have somebody on with us today to help us unpack some of this stuff. Harry Kazianis, good friend, back on the show again, Senior Director for the Center for the National Interest. Harry, welcome back.
Hey, Danny, good to be with you again.
And man, you know, as we were talking about just before we went on here, I think it bears just sharing with the rest of the group here. This is a really surreal world, one that like I don't know. Let's go back to say February of 2020. So we've been hearing something about some kind of new pandemic or something that was going on elsewhere in the world, but no one was really giving it much of a thought. And then to where we are today, it's like, wow, we've had a presidential assassination attempt of a major party, and now a president withdrew from the race and may withdraw from his office even before the end of this year coming up. Who knows what's going to happen next?
Yeah, we just don't know, Danny. I mean, it's very interesting, you know, speaking about Biden for a second, you know, yesterday when he, you know, gave up running for the Democratic National, you know, running to be president, it was very weird how he never gave an address to the nation, which I thought would be the right thing to do, you know, explaining his rationale. No pictures, no photographs, just a letter that's posted on X. And then he left the country waiting for about 20-25 minutes about, you know, is he going to endorse Kamala Harris? This is going to be an open convention. Where's this all going? So for Joe Biden, he's not giving anybody any sort of political closure. The more he does, the more questions come about. And, you know, I think the obvious thing here, Danny, is how, if he was unable to run for president, if he was unable to do that, how will he be able to handle the stresses and pressures of being commander in chief all the way until January 20th of next year? And I mean, that's not just a Republican talking point. I think the American people are going to continue to ask that question. And I think if he wants to give Kamala Harris the best chance possible, it would make sense for him to vacate the office, have Kamala Harris sworn in as president, and let her show the country and the world what she can do. So I know we're going to get into all this, but I have more questions than I have answers at this point. So I might be a little disappointing today.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's you're kind of echoing what a lot of us are thinking, and those questions themselves are very relevant to what's going on here. But let's just stick with that theme there for a second of what if President Biden does step down? Because I think that from a health perspective, if he's not strong enough to campaign for president, and you know, all of these gaffes, you know, it's not even gaffes anymore. It's like evidence of cognitive decline, inability to pull out words, inability to remember people's names, having these blank stares that come out of nowhere. I mean, those are obviously not minor issues about doing the job on a day-to-day basis. So I think that there's some significant concerns about that. And we'll see whether he does or doesn't. I know that so far the Democratic Party, they were worried about first getting the first issue resolved about whether he won't run. So now they're trying to find the second issue, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But let's look at what we could maybe expect. Let's say that whether intentional or just how it happens, that President Biden does withdraw and it does elevate Vice President Harris. What kind of a commander in chief would she be? And I'm talking right now, not potentially if she wins the next election. And just kind of here's a little evidence here. We want to see something. I want you to help me break this down. This is from February of this year, I think it was the 2-year anniversary mark of the Russia-Ukraine war. She was standing alongside Zelensky in Munich's security conference, I believe, and she made this comment.
In Munich 2 years ago, many thought Kyiv would fall in a matter of days, yet thanks to the skill and bravery of the people of Ukraine and the support of the 50-nation coalition the United States has led, Kyiv stands free and strong. President Zelensky, that is a testament, as I've said, to your extraordinary leadership and the determination of the people of Ukraine and their willingness to fight for their homes and their homeland, for their freedom and their independence. In this fight, Ukraine has achieved significant success against an adversary on an imperialistic quest to subjugate your nation.
Okay, so here's the first question, Harry. What she said there was basically just echoing what Biden has said for many months. So the first question, is she just saying, hey, that's what I'm told to say because I have to support the president? Or do you think she actually believes that stuff?
You know, Danny, I don't think from a policy perspective, we really know where, a potential Kamala Harris could, but President Kamala Harris could go. As vice president, she is to be loyal. She is not to go off script. She is to read every line that is presented to her. She's essentially a drone. And I don't mean that in a negative or pejorative sense. That is the role of the vice president. I think we have to dig a little deeper to figure out, who she is and who she could, where she could go. She hasn't been particularly ambitious as vice president. I've had the opportunity to scan through as many of her, daily schedules to try to see what she's been doing over the last couple months, going back as far as I could. Most of her days are pretty light. I mean, sometimes there's nothing on her schedule. Sometimes it's an event here or there, but she's not crisscrossing the country recently to do a lot to build up her public image. So there's that. I can tell you what Democratic staffers and people who have worked for her in the past have told me. They've pointed out that if you look at staff turnover since she took over the office of vice president, it's something like 88 or 89% of the staff have left her. When you look at the original staff and who she is now, I mean, that's in just a few years, Danny, that's pretty telling. That is a big vote of confidence for everybody to basically leave. And then it seems like every time something happens with Kamala Harris, you have all these anonymous Democratic sources who are all basically sticking the knives in her, in a literal sense. So it's hard to gauge where she's going to go, what she might do. She doesn't really have a very strong foreign policy record. She goes to a lot of these conferences. She says all the right things that Joe Biden would basically say. She's very good at reading her talking points. But I've never really seen her sort of go off script when it talks about, Ukraine or China or the NATO alliance. She's kind of a blank slate in those areas, which is kind of interesting. I would just end with this. What bothers me about her more than anything else is less about the policy than she really needs skilled people around her to shepherd her and guide her through this transition, especially if she becomes president. And if the people around her don't have confidence in her, they're not going to stick their neck out for her. They're not going to work, the grueling 80, 90 hours of what it takes to be in, the National Security Council or in the president's, senior echelons. So I'm worried just on that fact alone. And I'll end with what one staffer told me last night. She's uncaring and unmotivated. I don't know if that's going to change when if she does take the Oval Office and sits behind the Resolute desk. Some people have, but so far history doesn't show that that's going to happen.
Well, you know what, and it kind of in a similar vein, I once asked Tulsi Gabbard, maybe a year and a half after that exchange there, when I actually first met her. I asked her about that. I said, what would happen? Because obviously we've been talking about, Biden decline for quite a while, and people have been speculating, what if he can't make it through? And it would be a President Harris. And she said that she was really concerned because in her view, Harris didn't have the knowledge and the capacity to handle issues like we're talking about Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, et cetera, war and peace decisions. And she said her big fear is that who would be calling the shots, because who would she have on her staff at some of these key places, because she doesn't have a lot of I guess the chops of your own to be able to filter things through. No president is ever an expert in every area. You always have to surround yourself with people who can help you in areas where you're not that strong. That's self-evident. Nobody is, whatever it is, 17 different agencies. You always have to have experts. But on the ones that have to do with war and peace, and as a commander in chief, man, you need the person in that seat the person that behind Resolute desk has got to have a good set of knowledge of her own.
What's interesting, Dan, I mean, she has gone a lot of these big conferences, but I don't find her to be intellectually curious. I don't find her to be one that tries to reach out to a lot of different groups. I mean, when I was based in Washington, I always used to hear about, the Trump administration officials or the president reaching out to different groups, different experts, maybe even people they didn't agree with, to try and learn, to grow their base, to try and maybe build some points with people that maybe would be tough to do during the election cycle. I haven't heard much of that from the Biden camp or the Kamala Harris camp. Now, I haven't been in DC for about a year, so I'm not up on the latest sort of who's meeting who type of things. But for the years I was there, it just didn't seem like that she was doing those sorts of things. And what's also interesting, Danny, I'd say about Kamala Harris is that if foreign policy is her weakness, then if she is literally auditioning to be the president, or that was her ultimate goal before some of these cognitive issues that came out more strongly on Joe Biden, then if it was me, I would think, okay, this is not my area of expertise, but I'm going to do all I can to bulk up on it. I'm going to try and meet with the best experts. I am going to try and leverage the National Security Council staff. I'm going to crisscross the world for Joe Biden and deliver his foreign policy goals to people all over the world, or try to at least explain them and enunciate them. And in that, she would gain a wider worldview. I mean, I'll give credit to Joe Biden on one thing. He made it his mission to try and learn and understand as much about he wasn't president yet, but of Xi Jinping. And he is correct to get credit for being somebody who spent hours and hours and hours with Xi Jinping. And he has a very unique window on how that man thinks. And it was because he knew that Xi Jinping would likely become president, the head of China. And it made sense for him to do that. I don't see Kamala Harris doing anything like that. And if she were to assume the Oval Office, she's got a full plate of problems all over the world. Last thing I'll say, Danny, about this is that, I think her responsibilities as the borders are, I think she did not take very seriously. I think she looked at it as a political football she didn't want to touch. She went to Central American countries, probably looking to see what things she could do in those countries to try and, work on the root causes of mass migration and things of that nature. I do give her credit for that. I mean, that is something you'd want to do, but I think the American people expected her to go to the border. They expected her to talk to people on the border, and she didn't do that. And she's going to pay a price.
I never understood why she didn't. I remember that famous interview with Lester Holt, where he's saying, why haven't you been to the border? And I think she said, I was in South America at the time. And she said, we've been to the border. And he said, yeah, but you haven't been to the border. And she says, well, I also haven't been to Europe or something like that. Is obviously, I'm like, what? How's that help for your case? Why would you make it? And then why wouldn't the next day you go to the border? But apparently,
and something, Danny, on that Lester Holt interview, I'm glad you brought that up. What's really interesting about that interview, and this happens for a lot of times, is when she's challenged, she pauses, doesn't know what to do, gets very defensive, and fires some snippy line back. She can't do that as commander-in-chief. That wasn't even okay as vice president, but she needs to learn and to grow if she wants to become the president of the United States. There's some times where Joe Biden would do better with things like that. I mean, that shows how far she needs to go with this. So
yeah, and look, I think you can just say that opening clip we showed from the Tulsi Gabbard the exchange that they had during the primary debate in 2020. You see the same thing. I mean, the reason why that was that sank her campaign right there is because she didn't have a good response. She didn't have anything good to say back. I remember watching it live. It never left me, because I was like, I just imagined, as Tulsi was saying that, I'm like, well, she's probably going to answer with this or that, just like knock it right off. And instead she paused and hesitated and then went in a different direction that didn't even answer that. And I was going, whoa. So,
and a lot of times, Danny, from what I've heard, not just in the media, but from very close Democratic sources to Kamala Harris, past staffers, she doesn't prepare. They give her all the briefing books. They give her the opportunity to ask questions, to really be inquisitive in this important role that she's in. And a lot of times she just doesn't prepare. Okay. How that's inexcusable.
It is. And perhaps that could be some of the reason why, even though Biden in his I guess his withdrawal letter reportedly said he has complete confidence in Harris and that he endorsed her to follow him up. but apparently that's not exactly what's been going on everywhere else in the Democratic Party. So here is this information here that there's inside the Democratic Party, there's some big issues. Watch this.
Also understanding here is there is a massive burden on her shoulders that she is not unburdened by, and that massive burden is named Barack Obama. We are actually still in the beginning of the civil war within the Democrat Party, the Clintons versus the Obamas. And this little civil war has been playing out with the nomination, the presumed nomination of Joe Biden, until Barack Obama began to push him out of the way.
So do you think then others will put their hand up in the Democrats?
I think most Democrats are sitting back trying to figure out if, in fact, Barack Obama has the clout and the ability to force Kamala Harris out of the way. You know, it's a tricky battle because the Democrat Party here in America, of course, is so wed to the DEI effort that on its face, it looks like pushing her out of the way would anger the Black Democrat caucus here in our Congress. But with Barack Obama trying to undermine her, anything is possible.
Now, in case anybody thinks, oh, well, that's just some expert, it's probably not like that. Here was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez a couple of days ago being even more emphatic about a potential rift. At least I think we have.
If you think that there is consensus among the people who want Joe Biden to leave, that they will support Kamala, Vice President Harris, you would be mistaken. And I'm going to say that because if they're going to come out and say all their little things on background off the record, but they're not going to be fully honest, I'm going to be honest for them. I'm in these rooms. I see what they say in conversations. A lot of them are not just interested in removing the president. They are interested in removing the whole ticket.
So that kind of was eye-opening for me to hear her say that there's not this rush to, yes, let's go ahead and nominate Kamala Harris. She's the vice president. She's the most logical one. There's campaign financing issues that would seem to make that the only viable choice, but apparently it's not. Do you have any idea from any of your sources or so, is there really a potential civil war going on behind the doors in the Democratic Party?
I mean, Dan, there's always been really going back to 2019 into the 2020 presidential election. I mean, keep in mind, there's always been this battle between if you remember the 1990s term, the New Democrats, the Clintons versus the more progressive wing of the party, which is represented by the Squad, AOC. Even Kamala Harris would be considered, I think, lumped in there. I mean, she was considered, somebody to the left of Bernie Sanders. If you look at her voting record, she's now seen more as a moderate, obviously, coming under Joe Biden. But I think there's always been this tension between the centrists and the progressives on where the party should go. And you can see that in things like, debates over electric car mandates. You can see that over the Green New Deal. You can see that over, how much government spending there should be or how much government should be in people's lives. I mean, these battles have happened, but they've been sort of tamped down since 2020 when Joe Biden got the nomination. But think about this. I mean, we talked about this a little bit last week. Joe Biden got the nomination because the Democratic Party was so scared to have Bernie Sanders, an avowed socialist, to be their nominee because they didn't think that they would be able to beat Donald Trump. I don't know. Maybe they regret that decision now. It's tough to know. But I think when we think about Kamala Harris and where things are going to go, next, regardless of where Democrats sort of shape out. I mean, AOC in the last night ended up endorsing Kamala Harris in a very weird statement, like almost like she didn't say what she said a couple of days ago. Like it didn't make sense to me. I mean, was she offered something? Was she offered a potential cabinet position? Who knows? I mean, that's kind of strange how she just gave us very full-throated endorsement. But I do.
I mean, isn't that consistent with what she said? Because she said there are people who want to get rid of the whole ticket, not just Biden. And so maybe that is what she was thinking before, that she was for her. So perhaps that's why she came out and said that.
Yeah, her whole statement before was very puzzling to me. It didn't give me any meaning. It was just more confusing than anything else on that prior statement. But I think if we look out forward, and I know we'll talk about this more in depth, but I think Kamala Harris will lock down the nomination. I think if you look at the history of some of the things that Barack Obama has done, when we talk about, post-presidential politics for him, he's never been too eager to nominate or push forward, potential candidates. He's always been very safe on the sidelines, in the background. I mean, people have different theories on that. A lot of people say, Michelle Obama someday might want to run, although she's been very clear, at least in her public statements, that she doesn't want to do that. But considering how popular she would be and how much money she could probably instantly raise, I think she'll always be a threat. She'll always be out there. But I think for now, I think Kamala is going to lock it down. The money is hers. She's really the only potential, candidate out there I can see. I don't see anybody else who'd really be able to challenge her. But in the next couple of days, I think, Danny, what we'll see, and I'd love to talk about this either now or later, is, the media is going to reposition Kamala Harris. They are going to reimagine her. They are going to reboot her, and they are going to try and make her into the strongest possible candidate ever. Sean Hannity last night said it's going to be like the second coming of Jesus. It's funny. I said that a couple hours before he did, but I do think something like that is going to happen. They are going to try and reboot her and recalibrate her. But the problem is if Joe Biden doesn't resign, Donald Trump has the ultimate attack line. What did you know, and when did you know it, when it came to Joe Biden and his cognitive decline? The longer he sits in the Oval Office, he's just going to be able to keep hammering away at Kamala Harris on that. So it'll be interesting to see where this goes. But, we've got a couple months to watch it unfold.
Yeah. And one other thing I think, and we will talk about this a little bit later in the segment here, but so far, when the numbers have come out, some hypothetical polls had been done even before the announcement came down that showed Harris actually pretty close, and a couple of those actually ahead, which I found very surprising, because some of these were done after the assassination attempt even. So just on the surface of it, it sounds like it's not a given that Trump would win her. But here's what I want to know, and I know you've covered enough presidential campaigns and you've worked for a number. It's to me that's right now just kind of a hypothetical situation, just name recognition, et cetera. But once the campaign starts, and all of a sudden now then Harris is the target, not Biden, and people start bringing up issues like this, that could change the numbers. How do you see that playing out?
It's going to be interesting. Here's my prediction. I could be way off, but we have to think about it this way, Danny. We're months and months away from anybody actually going to the polls, and we're about, I think, 60-something days before early voting in Pennsylvania. So there's a lot of time on the clock here. Any polls that come out right now, I wouldn't listen to them. They don't matter at this point. I think Kamala Harris is going to get rebooted. They're going to make her look presidential. I think at least initially she's going to come out prepared. She's going to understand the moment that she's in, and she's going to understand, if she's smart, that this is her opportunity to repackage herself to the American people. You don't often, Danny, get a second chance in American politics. She's going to get the biggest second chance in a century to reboot herself. And I think she's going to take advantage of that.
Yeah, but here's the problem, Harry. She has to open her mouth. You know what I'm saying? I mean, no disrespect intended here, but we have a lot of track record of her opening her mouth, and the phrase "word salad" has been used so many times against her. And when you look at the videos, and I intentionally chose not to, I don't want to just try to make fun of her like a lot of these videos out there do, but she does provide a lot of evidence to make people say that, because stuff that just makes no sense.
Right.
Or she just says things that aren't even connected. And I don't know how you repackage that if that's who you really are.
I think, her friends on MSNBC and CNN will do a good job of reshaping the narrative when it comes to her. But this is what I would say. Can that last? She will get a bump in the polls. You will even see some polls that she will be ahead of Donald Trump. and the media will congratulate her. It'll be the biggest thing ever. It'll be the biggest comeback in U.S. political history. They'll sell it like that. But as we get deeper into the campaign and the American public starts to learn more about her, I mean, they're not watching right now. I mean, millions of people are on summer vacation. They're taking care of their kids on vacation. A lot of people, just because us that are in the political discourse of all this are watching it so carefully, doesn't mean everybody else is. I think once we get to October, November, and once we have that debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, if presumably that happens, the narrative will shift and start to slide downward. And Kamala Harris is going to have to answer the question, can you be a more effective commander-in-chief than the man who took a bullet? That's a pretty powerful narrative.
Yeah.
I can't spin that one away. I mean, that's going to be a really difficult, challenge for the Kamala Harris people. And also, too, I think you have to ask, who are going to be the senior advisors around her when she has this bad reputation of not being good to her people? You can say whatever you want about Joe Biden, but one thing I found, Dane, that was very interesting, people around him were so loyal that they were willing to lie. And I mean, lie on an epic scale for years about this man's cognitive capabilities. I mean, that's asking a lot for people, especially if someday they get subpoenaed and have to get called in front of Congress. I mean, they're literally putting their political careers and money on the line to support Joe Biden. That's a heck of a lot of loyalty. I don't see anybody doing that for Kamala Harris.
Yeah. And let's stick with Biden for a second because it transitions directly into this. Gary, if you could put that statement that he put out there when he made his withdrawal statement, one of the things he said kind of caught my attention here. And he said, "It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as president. And while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term." That's what I'm concerned about. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but the question is, can he finish out the remainder of his term? You and I have spoken many times on this, and I know you specifically talked to some experts who understand about cognitive decline, and these things don't get better. So what we've seen, the deterioration, even in this year alone, that led to the debate performance and led to some of the comments that he had made in the George Stephanopoulos interview and the NATO summit, interview, press conference. A lot of these things keep adding up. They're not going to get better. They could get a lot worse in the next 6 months. Do you think he even can continue his term?
No, he cannot. There's no possible way. And Danny, I mean, I have personal experience in this. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I have no medical knowledge, but I do have had multiple family members who have had cognitive issues, dementia, Alzheimer's, and probably like millions of other Americans. I've listened to the president. I've watched him. I remember, Danny, when he walked into the debate and my mouth dropped and said, "This is the president?" And I didn't mean that negatively. My heart sunk, to be honest with you. And not because he was an older gentleman, but because you could tell that there was a serious problem, that he could barely walk onto the stage. And then when he started speaking, I think I've become numb to some of Joe Biden's problems over the years, because when the debate was over, I said, it wasn't half that bad. I mean, that's kind of what I expected. He has cognitive issues. I mean, he has the same looks, stares, mannerisms that multiple family members that have been very close to me for many years had. Same exact things, no difference. And I think this is why millions of Americans started questioning this. And then all the pundit class started doing the same thing, because they probably had the same experience that I did, that he has these issues. So can he continue? No, he absolutely cannot continue. There's just no conceivable way that he will be able to independently make sound judgments on things of war and peace. I mean, Danny, me and you can go through all the countless scenarios that could happen between now and January 20th. I mean, especially if there's supposed to be could be an escalatory situation with Russia. If something happens in the South China Sea with Taiwan, on and on and on we can go. How can that man, if he can barely walk, if he can't keep a normal schedule, a 40-hour week schedule, how is it at 4 a.m. he's going to get a call and say, "Mr. President, Russia just dropped a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. What do you want us to do?" He's not going to be able to make the best decision possible. You need wisdom to be able to do that. And as much as I don't like Kamala Harris, it should be Kamala Harris making those decisions. That's our form of government. She deserves to be in that role, because I think, even though I fundamentally disagree with her, she's the one right now who can make the best choice. And anybody else who says otherwise, I don't know what they're saying.
Well, and if you're only talking about those two, I guess there's certainly a lot of I guess validity to what you're saying there. But if it is her, I mean, let's look at the ramifications of some of that. Because now we're not talking about if she happens to beat Donald Trump, and that's just something we'll be watching unfold over the next few months. But we're talking about, it could be, what would she do as commander-in-chief right now? So let's look at that first of all. She goes up against Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, maybe even some of our allies. Can she lead our allies? Do our allies, well, let's look at the first half. Let's look at our side first. Do our allies recognize her as having the heft of someone who is leading America, that we want to follow their lead, as opposed to saying, yeah, we're just going to kind of stand pat until whoever wins the next time, and then we'll see. Will they follow her?
It's tough to tell. I think as a president, what Kamala Harris would have to do is to act tough and act bold, to show that she can be, that she will not be pushed around. You know, she's got a trust deficit that she's going to have to sort of dig her way out of when it comes to some of these shenanigans as vice president. You know, as time goes on, the narrative will be built around her that she doesn't really know much of anything or what she's doing. I mean, you know, these word salads you were talking about and others, she clearly doesn't know her brief. She doesn't know, you know, all the different players involved in these big global affairs. So she's going to be tested. I mean, if I'm Kim Jong-un, I'm going to say, well, now it's time to test a nuclear weapon. Who's going to stop me? If I'm Xi Jinping, I'm going to say, maybe it's time to put more pressure on Taiwan, or really conquer the South China Sea. What is you know, Kamala Harris going to do? On the flip side of that, though, you could see a Kamala Harris that's extremely hawkish, thinking that she needs to build up her bona fides on foreign policy and really, you know, push the envelope. You know, maybe say to Ukraine, attack anything you want, Russia, go for it. That was something I didn't agree with Joe Biden. Go, you know, do that. Maybe not. You know, maybe she has a different policy when it comes to Israel and tries to get Netanyahu to back off. It's such a rabbit hole that we're going to go down if she does become the commander-in-chief. But my gut tells me that she's going to want to flex and flex strong. She's going to want to act tough and bold. What that means for policy, I think it means a hawkish foreign policy, but I could be wrong.
So now let's look at the American side of this. Commander-in-chief, not whether she can go toe-to-toe with Xi Jinping, but will the American military follow her? Now, I don't mean like literally, because they're constitutionally obligated to do that, so they will. But will they give her their trust? I'm talking about right away. So based on what has happened over the last 3+ years, and what was known about her before, do you see any challenges or issues with that? And we're talking both among the senior ranks, but also among the rank and file.
I mean, I think that's up to her to make the case. I think if I was her right now, I'd be making lots of calls to try to lock down the nomination. But in between that, wouldn't exactly be watching TV. I would be pulling every briefing book I possibly could. I would be trying to just suck in as much knowledge that I possibly could, because she has to know that the pressure that's going to be on Joe Biden to resign is going to be intense. So she knows there's probably a 60-70% chance that she's going to get that call to take the Oval Office. So this is her time to get as educated on the issues as much as possible. And that means calling in experts, talking with Secretary Blinken or anybody else that she wants to on foreign policy to get literate and get literate fast. She doesn't have a lot of time at this point. And the key thing here, Danny, is she wants to be looking in charge as much as she can. So when she walks into the Situation Room, when there is a crisis, she's approaching those issues from not only a potential of strength, but a place of knowledge and wisdom, where when the questions are asked of her, she'll be able to respond intelligently and not have to ask a lot of silly basic questions that will make people not have confidence in her. And that's the only way that she's going to reverse this narrative about her, that she's not prepared and untested. She has to win people's confidence to do that. The ball's in her court to do this, but the question is, will she do it? I mean, she's given, like I said, a heck of a second chance. If it was me, I'd be all in.
You know, it bears saying out loud, because as you're going through this whole thing, talking about it, you know, now then that this thing is coming to politics, number one, in a related way that you mentioned earlier, she's known about his cognitive decline from the beginning. Nobody knows it more than she does. Why in God's name, even forget about that, as the vice president, the one who's a heartbeat away from the White House, it seems like from the first day in office, you would have been doing everything that you just mentioned there, because you know that whether some unexpected thing happened, a health issue, something else, it's always possible you could become the president. And on that day, you don't get a second chance. You don't get to start learning anything. You have to start from day one, so that if that unexpected thing happens, you're already at least hitting the ground running. But why is she waiting now, Harry? Why is she waiting this long when she's had the knowledge and she's had the position to start trying to do the things you're mentioning there, if she does?
Hubris. That's the only thing I can say, Danny. I mean, you've been in DC for a long time. I was in DC for a long time. You start to realize that sometimes people who are at the top or close to the top feel like that once they get to the top, they don't have to do anything else. And I can give you a lot of examples of this. I've seen this over the years in terms of organizations, governmental organizations, people in the White House, Democrat and Republican, that just feel like once they get that top echelon position, I'm done. I don't need anything else. I'm the man or the woman, and I don't need to do anything else. I don't know why that is, but I think this is why so many Americans recoil from politics and recoil from Washington, because, and I did. I mean, I'm not in DC anymore because I can't stand things like this. You know, public servants and people that are elected in office, they're there to do the public's good and to keep the country safe, secure, and prosperous. And I think you can make a very intelligent argument that Kamala Harris hasn't done that. But furthermore, she was a willing participant in this lie that has been told the American people, that Joe Biden was cognitively fine. And I think for a lot of Americans, they sort of brush it off and said, he's an old man. He's like grandpa, you know, he'll be fine. You know, he's just older, you know, there's a lot of mileage, you know, on him, but he's kicking, he's doing all right. And then that debate happened and it blew the narrative off. And I think the real thing that in the next couple months that Kamala Harris is going to have to answer for is, again, how did she let this go on? How can she be a credible commander in chief when she propagated this lie, when she, or maybe didn't do it? I'll be a little bit more charitable and say maybe just swept it under the rug and hope to God it wasn't as bad as what everybody saw it was. I mean, how did Joe Biden act in the Situation Room when things are moving quickly, or there's a terrorist attack or something major is happening, and he's got not only got to know the brief, but he's got to be able to make quick, intelligent decisions. There's no time for cognitive hiccups. You have to be willing to go. And they all saw this. So she's going to have to answer that. And you can see the Trump campaign already starting to ramp that up. When does she know? When does she know? And you're going to keep hearing that over and over. So I think, again, her poll numbers will go up. And then after the convention, if they have a good convention, they're going to start sliding down because Donald Trump's going to hammer on it.
And I think that concurrent with that, it needs to be asked that question, because to me, this second question is more important than the one you just asked, and that is, why did you not take advantage of the opportunity then, knowing that the odds were growing that you would have to step into this role and not do the things that you just mentioned as a person you should need to do? Talk to all these experts on the basic issues, not running around all these puff pieces and the View and some of these other things. Harry, it just seems like that a lot of this stuff she hasn't made herself knowledgeable about. She just goes and reads teleprompter notes or whatever, but can't really engage when the interviewers try to go off script and ask her what she thinks about stuff. That's where the word salad comes, because she doesn't have the knowledge. Except with, and I know many Democrats put this as high on the list, is the whole pro-abortion thing. That seems to be something she genuinely cares about, and she can riff. I watched some of her comments about that kind of stuff. That's something she really believes in. But is that really a winning motion for the president of the United States? And will that carry enough people who also care about that at the expense of these other things?
I mean, I think Democrats will try to make abortion the top issue once again. But look, to be honest with you, Danny, the top issue for me is the ghost of inflation past. Now, what do I mean by that? Inflation, if you really look at the hard data right now, inflation is not as big of a problem as it was. It's about 2.8% right now. But what I think Americans are really mad about is the inflation that occurred from when the American Rescue Plan happened, that $1.9 trillion that was injected into the economy back in March of 2021 that didn't need to be injected, that really ramped up this inflation. Because literally a month later, that's when the inflation problem started and continued on for several years until the Fed jacked up interest rates so much that it literally destroyed that plan because it ate up all the demand side of that. So I think Americans, I think the Democrats will try to make this about, culture issues, culture war things. And I think Republicans will kind of initially feel like they want to mix it up on that. But I think what's going to happen is the Trump campaign understands that what this election's about more than anything else, put aside assassinations, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, put all that away for a second. What is the number one thing Americans care about? Going to the grocery
border,
store.
Right? Well, that one, depending on which one you like, secure the border and low grocery bills.
I think for me, it's the financial, because I'm still shocked to this day when I go to the grocery store and the prices are 30 to 40% more than they were in 2019.
My wife and I had that exact conversation last night when she got back from the grocery store. So I
can't
know
believe it. Danny, there's been times where I've gone to Costco and spent $1,000, and it's just me and my wife. And I'm not talking about like bulking up on 100 cans of tuna or something like that. Like I'm talking like bread and butter stuff. Or we go to Publix here in Florida. Food here in Florida is very expensive, very, very expensive. I've seen a gallon of milk for $5 or $6 a gallon. So I mean, it is wild. And I think for Donald Trump, what he needs to say is, look what Democratic policies did to your wallet. Forget everything else. And if I was Trump, I would say, you might not agree with me on everybody. You might not like the way I some of the things I say, but during the years that I was president, were you better off economically? Was inflation low? Buying a house is impossible. Literally, my wife and I just bought a house, not to get too personal, Danny, but the interest rate was 7%. The interest rate on my prior house was 3%.
Yep.
So the reason why those things are is because Democratic policies led the Fed to jack up interest rates because inflation was going to hit 9% at one point. So forget the rest of everything else. If Donald Trump zeroes in on the economy and just keeps hammering it, they should have a commercial of somebody going to the grocery store. That would resonate with people. Yeah. So there's a lot of other deeper issues, but I think that is one that needs to be really touched, and the border, of course.
Yeah. And we're going to see how all this works out, in terms of just the election here. But my bigger issue though is who's going to be the commander in chief, because a lot of these things are policy issues and maybe you have to spend more money here and there. But I'm really worried about somebody who might get us sucked into a war. And I do worry about what you mentioned there a second ago, that one reaction could be that she tries to overcompensate and doesn't want to be seen as inferior to Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, et cetera, that she goes a little stronger just to show them who's boss or something like that. And then we end up in a bad place. But we'll see. Right now, she's not even the candidate right now to replace. She's just been nominated. So we'll see how that works out. But thanks ever so much for coming on today and give us some of these great ideas and great ways to think about this. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Danny.
And we thank you guys too. And also want to remind you, even as we're talking right now, there's still some live conversation going on the Hill where the Secret Service director, Kim Cheadle, is being grilled. I've seen a little bit of it so far. It's pretty tough. But this afternoon, with Matt Hoh and Tony Shaffer at 4 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to get back on and we're going to go on a complete analysis of what she said. And I've also got some new information about the shooter and how that thing broke out there. You are not going to want to miss that, folks. 4 p.m. today. Tune in to Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Be sure to like and subscribe and share your friends. They're not going to want to miss this one. We'll see you at 4 o'clock this afternoon. See you.